Alright, hear me out. Just imagine if the creators of Rick and Morty made a game that was a first-person shooter that had guns that can talk. Well, good news, you don't have to, because I actually made that. That's a real thing that exists. And that game's called High on Life. It's made by Justin Roiland and his game studio, Squanch Games. It has all the crazy, wacky, wavy, over-the-top comedy that's in a Rick and Morty episode, and actually some really solid gameplay elements as well. You play as some human kid, fresh out of high school, no job, no ambition, but you inadvertently become a bounty hunter in order to save humanity from being harvested and used as drugs by the alien G3 cartel. Now, the talking guns that I mentioned earlier are an alien species called Gatlians, and these Gatlians are basically gun-shaped aliens that have faces that can talk to you, and they each have their own individual personalities and their own abilities. Now, I won't go over what each Gatlian can do because unlocking those abilities give you a nice aha moment, and you discover how you can traverse the world easier and reach areas you can never get to before to find collectibles and items you need for the game. So telling you their abilities now would be kind of a spoiler and kind of ruin it for you, so I'm just going to avoid that altogether. While playing through High on Life, I had the thought, wow, this kind of plays like a Metroid game. And you know, it's actually not shocking to hear that the chief creative officer of Squanch Games, Mikey Spano, sorry if I butchered that name, he actually said that they structured this game to play a lot like Metroid Prime 2 Echoes. There's actually a Digital Trends article that quotes him saying that the game is like Metroid Prime, but funny. And actually, that's one of the best ways I could describe this game. If someone were to approach me and say, hey, what's High on Life like? I would definitely say it's like playing Metroid Prime, except it's so much brighter, so much more colorful, and it's filled to the brim with that crazy, sometimes really dark Rick and Morty humor that a lot of people seem to love. Speaking of that humor, the Gatlians, as you're using them, are always cracking jokes. They're always breaking the fourth wall. A lot of characters just often mention that you're in a game. In the very beginning, when you pick up the first Gatlian, if you don't fire it right away, he actually starts talking about pressing buttons on a controller like he knows that you're holding a controller, which is just really funny. This game's definitely not taking itself seriously. I've got to say, High on Life is the most vibrant game that I've ever played. It's really impressive what a small indie studio was able to do to really just match AAA game graphics that have millions and millions of dollars pumped into it. And it's being such a small studio, it's just makes that even more impressive. Throughout the game, you travel to a few different planets, and each planet has its own very specific biome. You have the planet that you start out at and has like a really bustling city, but it has like a sludgy sewer, like slums underneath it. And then you have a planet that's, I think it's more of like an asteroid, and on the top is like a barren desert, and on the bottom, kind of like a seedy underbelly, has like a criminal like city underneath. And then there's another planet that's kind of like a lush rainforest, but it's like a weird alien lush rainforest, almost like what you'd see like in the Avatar movies, where everything's pretty much alive and everything's like bioluminescent. I'm a really big fan of the art style, and I actually heard of it as Blade Runner meets the Muppets, and it's kind of makes sense. It's just a really weird and wacky and outrageous idea of what's out there in space. Now that I've talked about all the positives for the game, I do have some criticism. This game is a little bit glitchy, it's a little buggy, and nothing game breaking, nothing that's completely stopped it for me where I had to start a new character or kind of stop me from going further in the game. But there are some things that kind of mess up the experience for me. Now there's an achievement for collecting all of the cards, so there's like collectible cards that you can get throughout the game. I had to reload a save, and for whatever reason, when it loaded me back into the game, I just got that achievement. It's one of those rare achievements that not a lot of people got, and I feel like it gave me the achievement for no reason. I definitely still haven't even gotten all the cards yet, so I shouldn't have that achievement yet. But there's also another glitch that stopped me from getting a different achievement. Now there is an achievement for basically completing all these forum posts, so killing certain enemies, killing enemies certain ways, and discovering different areas on each map. And in the first city, there's 3 locations that you have to discover. And for whatever reason, even though I discovered all 3 locations, it didn't register. And so I completely missed out on that achievement. Now, I am hoping that if I start a brand new character that I can play through and get that achievement. But that specific one is one that takes a long time to build up. You have to complete every single one of those things, and it takes a whole playthrough to achieve all of those different challenges. This isn't really a bug or a glitch, but there are things in the game that once you go through a certain part, you can't go back to get. So there's one whole achievement you can't even get if you decide to play the game in a specific order. And there's part of the achievement that I was mentioning before where you have to collect 5 things about this certain character, and one of them is hidden in an office that once you get through the area, you can't go back in to get it. So it's basically impossible to get that achievement if you didn't already know you were supposed to collect that item. I played it for a couple hours a day for a few days, and I think I probably played it for maybe 12 to 16 hours, I guess. Now, I'm sort of a completionist, so if I play a game that has a lot of collectibles, like this game has a lot of treasure chests and abilities and things, I like to go through and get all that side stuff. But if you're not that kind of person and you play right through the main story, this game's not really all that long. It's really more like 6 to 8 hours, depending on how quickly you can go through it, which kind of makes it a short game. But sometimes it's really nice to have a game that's kind of concise, that you just play right through it and you don't have to spend a whole month playing for hours a day just to get through the main story. To add on to the fact that this is a short game, there really isn't a lot of locations that you can access. There's 3 different planets that really have kind of like 3 or 4 different areas within the planet. But for most of the game, you're really just traveling through those same locations over and over again, and that can get kind of repetitive. And I understand that this kind of game being like a Metroid style game, that makes a lot of sense, but even Metroid games have a lot more different varying areas that you can go through. And even though there is backtracking in those kind of games, like, you still have a lot more that you could do. So I'm hoping that if they do make a sequel, that they expand on that and give you a lot more areas to discover. There really isn't a huge variety of enemies throughout this game. I think you really face maybe at tops 7 different types of enemies. And really, out of those 7, there's like 2 or 3 of them are like the same ones that just keep repeating over and over and over again. And they're the easiest ones to fight. They're the same really boring enemies that just kind of hide behind things and shoot at you. And that being said, really, that's a lot of them, that's all they do. They just hide behind a crate, come out every once in a while, fire a couple times, go back behind the crate, and then just keep repeating that activity. And I really couldn't count how many times I've seen an enemy behind a crate and they had just enough of their body showing that I could attack them, and after shooting them a bunch of times, they just kind of stood there and took the shots until they died, which is like really weird for an enemy to do. Although the enemies in this game, a lot of them come across as just incredibly dumb, so maybe that's really what they were going for. The enemies aren't really smart enough to come out of cover to find different cover just if they're being shot at. But because of their stupidity, it kind of makes me feel like it makes sense that they act like that. Now, I personally wasn't a huge fan of Rick and Morty, but I thought this game was really funny. The humor was really dark. That's really just kind of my style of humor anyway. Now, a couple weeks before this game launched, I asked a few friends if they were going to play it, and some of them did say no, and the reason was actually kind of surprising. The biggest reason was the fact that this was made by the same people who made Rick and Morty, therefore the comedy in there is basically the same kind of comedy as in Rick and Morty. And some of my friends just really weren't fans of the show, and they said no, they're not going to play the game because of that. So I can understand if that's a kind of turnoff. The guns in this game, they do talk a lot. So much so that Squanch Games actually released an update for the game that gave people the option in the menu to turn down the actual dialogue from the guns. Now, can I recommend this game? You know what? I personally can't recommend this game enough. I had a lot of fun playing it. It's pretty funny, and it's just a really solid game altogether. And even if you're not a fan of the Rick and Morty humor, I really still think you should give it a try. And if you have Game Pass, you have absolutely no excuse to at least try this game. If you enjoyed that review, I'll be making a lot more just like this one, so go ahead and click here to subscribe. Otherwise, I'll see you on the next one.